We are now joined by recurring guest, one of our most popular guests here on the podcast. It's Emily Leiker of Syracuse.com. Emily, how are you?
I'm well. How are you guys?
We're good. Recording this just for full disclosure, 6 days before the Boca Raton Bowl. It's Friday, December 15th. So Emily, let's start super broad. I guess we talked to you at the beginning of the season before the Colgate game, and now we're here after 12 games, and a lot has happened in Syracuse over the course of this football season. So what was your season like?
It was a unique season. I've only been here 2 seasons, but like I feel like I've got every situation imaginable through 2 seasons of football. And I think back at the beginning of the season, it's kind of crazy to think back because at that time, like we were all talking like this is a 9-win season. Maybe they make a push for 10. Like, does Dino like save his job and get another extension? And now we're here at the end, and Dino did not save his job. They did not come anywhere close to 9 wins. They barely scraped a bowl game. So it's been a lot. And then the 3 weeks since the end of the regular season have been a whirlwind, which December usually is in college football, just because of everything that's going on. But it is just on another level. Like even I talk to like other friends that are covering college football, and I'm like, I feel like something like every time I close my eyes, like there is like 8 things that happen, and I open my eyes again and I'm like, oh my God, I have so much to catch up on. It's recruiting news, it's transfer portal news, it's oh my God, there's a new coach being hired. So it's been a very busy season, but I think it was entertaining, even if for Syracuse fans, that entertainment was not always positive entertainment.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously Dino Babers being fired the last after Georgia Tech, so before the last week of the regular season, covering the coaching search, recruiting, and that is already happening this weekend and last weekend. Just going back to Dino for one moment, he's no longer with Syracuse. What was your favorite Dino Babers moment in your 2 years here, or even just this season alone?
Oh boy, there's
I know there's a
there's
lot
a
of
lot
them.
to choose from. I mean, I think I have to lean back on my old reliable viral moment, which was last season after the NC State win. Um, uh, they were 6-0 at that time. It was a ranked upset. They thought they were going to go into Clemson crazy. So we're talking sit down post game, and uh, I I asked about, I believe Garrett Schrader's interceptions was the question I was trying to get out of my mouth before Dino interrupted and was like, Emily, enjoy it. Like, this never happened at Missouri, which, to be fair, it did not happen at Missouri while I was there. Missouri has been 6-0 before some other stretch, I'm sure. They've been a number 1 team at some point in their history. But that was definitely a moment. I got that clip up on social ASAP because I went to journalism school and I know that that's what you're supposed to do. And then I went and got a beer, and that was probably my favorite Dino memory, even though like in the moment I was definitely like shaking so much and was like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I keep asking my question? How do I respond to him? So I would probably have to go with that. I think the last we saw of Dino is also probably always going to stick with me, especially since like, I don't know, like he might retire and never be seen in the coaching world again. And so being in the basement of the Georgia Tech stadium in their like team weight room, and seeing Dino come in, and he like walked to the back of the room and like stood there for a second and was like, it was clear that he was thinking about something, and he played it off as like he was thinking about him. He was thinking about the weight room and how their weight room was better. But now that we know, like he was fired the next morning, and we know he had been given this 7-5 like requirement and stuff like that, you're just like, what was he really thinking about in that moment? So that's always going to stick with me. That's not necessarily a fun one though.
I mean, I was, lucky enough to sit in a handful of press conferences this year, and I can still hear him in his Dino voice. Anytime you would ask a question, like Emily, like giving you, his whole spiel. And if you're asking about, even if you didn't ask about penalties, he would make a point to point out that you didn't ask about penalties because they, happened to have a cleaner game when it came to infractions. You mentioned like the hecticness of the last couple of weeks. What is covering a coaching search like? I talked about it with we talked with Chris Carlson last week and he talked about it. We've talked about it with Brent and he said when I saw him at a basketball game a couple weeks ago, it seemed like he just wanted to go to bed and sleep for 12 hours. But what is that like? And then now with the transfer portal, how is that all flowed together?
Yeah, it pretty much is just always wanting to sleep and being paired. I think like the best way to describe it is like anytime I go to do something that's not sitting in front of my laptop, I'm like, what if news breaks? I'm like, I really need to go to the grocery store. What if news breaks? I need to take a shower. What if news breaks? And like at some point, this is also, I think, just like a good lesson for journalists, but like at some point, you just got to set it aside. It's like, even if the news breaks, you need to go to the grocery store or you need to take a shower. And like, it's okay to just take a breather for 10 minutes. But yeah, boy, it's just been everything. This is my second coaching search that I'm covering. I covered when Eli Drinkwitz was hired at Mizzou. That was my end of my sophomore year. So I covered the Barry Odom, Eli Drinkwitz crossover. And that was definitely different because I was at a student paper at the time and my student editors were not as gung-ho about like us needing to be the ones to break the news on the coaching search and stuff like that. So definitely less pressure, but you know, it's crazy. It's definitely a lot. And Brent and Chris have been a huge help. So we've got a good little team going right now, but it is still a lot to deal with.
It's actually funny because I was in charge of making our men's lacrosse schedule graphic, and I knew, they announced that they were announcing it. Was it yesterday or whatever day it was? And I knew it was coming out. You just don't know what time. And I had morning casts on the radio, and I had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. And I was like, I need to take a nap, but I don't know when they're gonna actually release the schedule. So I was like, I like half napped, and I heard my phone buzzing. I'm like, I think the schedule just came out. Let me go check. So that was funny. In terms of, obviously covering the coaching search, the introductory press conference, and the 2 weeks, I think now at least 2 weeks since then. What are your first impressions of Fran Brown, and how do you think that he's going to interact maybe with the media a little bit differently than your first season, 2 seasons with Dino Babers?
Yeah, certainly his introductory press conference, I think we got a great taste of what he's going to be like as a person. He's a younger guy, so I think he's just a little bit naturally more personable and a little bit more out there. He obviously he wasn't like standing at the podium the whole time. He kind of tried to walk around. They should have given him a wireless mic. I was like, give this dude a wireless mic. He does not want to stand at the podium. Like they should have given a wireless mic. He could have worked the room. I don't know when this is airing. I did get to go in and talk to Brown today a little bit, and that was the same kind of tone and demeanor that he had speaking one-on-one. So that was kind of great because sometimes you never know, like, oh, is someone turning it on for the boosters and the other people in the room at a press conference? But he was just as much of a storyteller and just as much of kind of like an open and honest, like here's my life and here's the role all of these things have played in my coaching career and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that he will have a good relationship with us as the media. Relationships are his big thing. Like that's what he's talked about so much with recruiting and with just maintaining players and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that he kind of views us the same way and that we'll get to talk to some of these other kind of big names he's brought in, like Elijah Robinson at defensive coordinator and all the other ones that aren't like officially announced yet, but are out there.
How much optimism do you think there should be within this program? I think the thing I keep coming back to is like this recruiting optimism is, totally warranted. And it's unbelievable to see what Brown and his coaches are doing. But like then, it keeps trickling in the back of your mind. What have been some of the big issues with Dino over the past couple of years? Game management, to like timeouts, penalty, like actual like coaching stuff. And Fran Brown like hasn't even been a coordinator to like be doing this coaching stuff. And based on the hires that he's brought in, these also are not people who have been in situations like that. So how much full optimism should there be? And what I guess what I'm trying to say is why does it feel like there's more optimism for recruiting when there are still these major questions when it comes to actually coaching on the field?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because we're going to have to wait so long to really know what his coaching style is like in terms of all that stuff that you mentioned, like game clock management. What type of decisions is he going to make on like a 4th and 1 call, which we had so many controversial ones this year, it felt like. I think with the recruiting stuff, it's like we're at that time of year in the athletic calendar where just like recruiting is at the forefront. And because he was hyped up so much as a recruiter, like I do think this was inevitable, that there was just going to be kind of like an explosion of optimism and positivity around the recruiting. And certainly like that is justified. Like what they are doing, what he has done, flipping commits, bringing in transfers that Syracuse might not have even looked at. Even the fact that we know these people are visiting, like that tells you something, because I'm sure have been transfers the past few years that have visited Syracuse, but we just didn't know about it because the previous coaching staff maybe didn't see a value in that, or kids didn't want to say like, oh, I'm looking at Syracuse. And now like to be looking at Syracuse is, okay, you're looking at a program that could potentially change its entire reputation in the next handful of years. So it's interesting. I do think you have to be balanced. And I think eventually the scales will kind of level out. Obviously the transfer portal is still open. We're still seeing current guys on the roster leave. And yes, not a lot of them have been starters yet. I do think some of that will happen after the bowl game. These guys want to play in the bowl. They want to close out the season with their 2023 coaches. And then they might be like, hey, I don't want to stay around any longer after that. So I think once January 2nd passes, that's the day that the transfer portal closes, at least in terms of personnel, we'll be able to gauge a little bit better, like what the optimism level should be like. You'll hopefully know by then who's the quarterback. Is it McCord? Is it someone else that they managed to bring in through the portal? You'll know, is Gadsden returning? You'll know, is Dan Villari returning? LeQuinn, all of that stuff. And like all indications point to yes at this moment, but until we get through this bowl game, I think that's still a little up in the air. But yeah, that was a long-winded way to say, I do think the optimism is justified, but there is still a lot to be seen outside of kind of the personnel side of things.
So looking at the roster right now, obviously it's not going to be, confirmed of who's staying, who's going till after the bowl game and once the transfer portal closes. But just looking at the roster right now and some of the recruits that are coming in for visits and all that, what are the holes specifically that Syracuse, that, John Wildhack has talked about how they want to be competitive. This is not a rebuild, it's a reboot. What are some of the holes on the roster that a Fran Brown should look to fill? Obviously, given that, the offense is going to be run a little bit differently and the defense, I would assume, is not going to be a 3-3-5.
Right. I think on the offensive side, the big one is quarterback, because for better or worse in this day and age, you cannot run an offense without a veteran quarterback. And the only way you get a veteran quarterback, if you're not developing the ones that you have that are freshmen and sophomores, is to go through the portal. So that's the big one, is who's going to be quarterback, I think. Otherwise, like running back, they still got quite a few and they have a couple signings. So I think they're good there. Offensive line, they're not in rough shape. They have some guys coming in. It looks like they might land a few transfers, so that will help there. Tight end, if everything holds, is perfectly fine. I don't think there's any worries there. Wide receiver, I think would have been the big one. I would have said kind of like immediately leaving the season. It's still kind of unclear if Damian Alford's going to come back. And even then, like, he was the leading receiver this year, but we saw how inconsistent he was and how it tended to only be like 1 or 2 big plays a game. So I think just deepening their wide receiver core and getting guys that can be consistent targets for whoever that next quarterback is probably the main focus there. And then, on the defensive side, I think it's the defensive line and the secondary. Defensive line is obviously losing a couple guys, lost Terry Lockett to the transfer portal. You are potentially looking at playing a 4-down front instead of a 3-down front. So that's going to add, you need more guys on your depth chart now. And then the secondary was already kind of dwindling this season. And I mean, Justin Barron had to play the whole season with a club on his hand, which, like, if you had more depth, maybe wouldn't have happened. And he maybe would have gotten that club off his hand sooner. So I think that those are the 2 positions on defense. And so far, like, at least in whom they're targeting, not all of these people have been landed yet, but in terms of who Brown is targeting, it does seem like he is aware of those needs and is addressing them.
So you had an article up on Syracuse.com today about who's visiting Syracuse this weekend. It's a pretty lengthy list, a good mix of high school recruits who haven't committed, a good amount of players who committed to Syracuse when Dino Babers was still the head coach, and then a number of players in the portal as well. McCord's obviously the biggest name, and he's been driving people crazy. Like this, a what? Some places a 5-star, some place a 4-star. The quarterback of Ohio State coming to visit Syracuse. How real is this McCord stuff?
I do think it's real. I will say that there had been some chatter of this a couple weeks ago that like never kind of made it out there, because then Nebraska came into the mix and it seemed like Nebraska was going to land him. And so then I don't think things really came back into play with Syracuse again until whatever happened at Nebraska the other day that caused that agreement to fall apart, or potential agreement to fall apart. I don't think Syracuse came back into play until after then. So I do think it's real. I mean, he has connections to, he's from Philly. He's very close to the Camden area. He knows Denis Jaquez Jr. There was photos last night that I retweeted of them playing Little League together. He fits the style of offense that we've kind of heard Brown talk about, like a more pro style quarterback approach, very pass heavy. He really only passed the ball this year, 3,000 yards through the air, but I think like negative 65 rushing, which is like way different than Syracuse is used to in its quarterback game the past few years. So I do think it's real. I do think there's real interest there. I would have to guess, and again, this is just a guess, if you don't get him to sign this weekend, that would be like a little bit of a red flag to me. Like if he doesn't come out of this visit and then declare that he's coming to Syracuse, then it's like, okay, what are you waiting for? Because both on his side, like, what are you waiting for? You need to get enrolled at a new school. You need to figure out where you're going. But then also on Syracuse's side, you need to have a quarterback in place before the bowl game is over and these guys that have maybe been holding on to their decision to portal make those decisions. So I think if we get out of this weekend and there's a McCord announcement, then Syracuse is set. But if they come out of this weekend and McCord is maybe like, oh, I don't know, then they're going to need to pick up the pace on getting someone else in here and getting someone signed.
And he's been the biggest name, but if you go to this article and this very nice chart you have here, it's a 2-page chart of people that are coming and visiting this weekend. Some of the other names that stick out to me, the two biggest recruits under this class for Dino were Jamie Tremble, the tight end, and Jakari Williams, the quarterback. Both of them being from Georgia. Who are some of the other big names that you think it's important are visiting this weekend, and what does that signal about Brown's recruiting?
Yeah, I think Fadil Diggs is another big one. That is the edge rusher from Texas A&M, who's originally from Camden. There's like 4-5 guys at this point who are originally from Camden, which is Brown and Elijah Robinson's hometown, visiting this weekend. So I think that's huge. I mean, the emphasis here, if you look through it, is definitely defensive players and then like offensive line / tight end type players. So like there's a clear trend in what they're looking for and trying to pick up. I think besides Diggs and the ones we've already mentioned, someone that came up this morning was Devin Grant, who's the safety out of Buffalo, and is originally from New York. I think he's probably a name to watch as well and would help address that secondary concern that they have going on.
So if the quarterback, let's say hypothetically, Kyle McCord comes here this weekend, doesn't commit, who are the other quarterbacks that are on Syracuse's radar? Because if you look at next year, and we're talking about the reboot, not rebuilding, Syracuse to win needs a quarterback, because the quarterback is objectively not coming from the roster that is right now. And Jakari Williams as a freshman wouldn't necessarily be hard to kind of go in and start. So who are the other quarterbacks that SU should look for if Kyle McCord doesn't commit to Syracuse?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys in the portal right now who have Northeast ties, who have ACC ties, who have ties to schools that Brown has been at in the past. this is an old list, so there is a chance that some of these people I'm about to name have committed elsewhere, and I'm just not on top of that yet because they're not at Syracuse. But I think Will Howard from Kansas State, he's one. He had Syracuse and Temple offers during his recruiting cycle. He's from the Northeast. The Holy Cross quarterback, Matthew Sluka, obviously not as big of a name as maybe you want, but he had a good season this year and could be someone regionally that they could get. You got ACC guys, MJ Morris and Mitch Griffiths in the portal, who like those could be easy pickups. Evan Simon, one of the Rutgers quarterbacks, is in the portal, and he was enrolled when Brown was there, so he knows him. Campanelli was actually his secondary recruiter, and we now know that, well, we know based on his Instagram or his Twitter bio and not a real announcement that Campanelli is coaching the quarterbacks now. So that could be a connection there. And then obviously you have Cole Snyder from Buffalo visited. I don't think he's necessarily the guy you want to drop in a starting role as you're trying to revamp your offense. But if all came down to it, you just got to get someone in there, and he's at least experienced and older and can maybe help bring in some of these younger guys like Jakari Williams and even Braden Davis, who transferred in last year.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks with the portal. But on the forefront is this Boca Raton Bowl. A couple things regarding that. I guess first, what is Fran Brown's involvement going to be? Like, will he be at the game? Will he be on the sideline? Will he be in, like, what is he going to be doing during the game? Because we know that Campanelli is going to be the interim head coach.
So it's my understanding that Brown will arrive in Boca around on the 19th. So that's a couple days after the team does. He's obviously hosting visitors this weekend and has to wrap up 2024 recruiting. Signing day is on Wednesday. So he's got to do all that. He's coming down to Boca on the 19th. I would assume he's going to be on the sideline. Like, we know he's been around practice and stuff like that. He just hasn't been taking the reins and like leading practice, but he's been around. So I would expect it to kind of be the same situation where he's on the sideline. Maybe he's talking to some guys. Maybe we see a moment with him and Allen or him and Clark, two guys we know he has relationships with already. But everything that's been indicated to me is that this, like, coaching wise, it's going to be the 2023 staff. Really, no one that we know is not being retained has like left yet. So like all of that should be in place. Lynch is the only one who's like gotten an offer or been reported to be going elsewhere. But as far as I know, he's riding out the bowl with Syracuse, just like the rest of them are. So yeah, Brown will be there, but like, we're not going to like, oh, like this is a Brown, like it's not going to be a game where you can judge what Brown's offense or defense is going to look like, because he's not going to have control in that.
Speaking of the X's and O's, looking at, the last game against Wake Forest, I think everyone was expecting that same kind of offense with little to no passing. And then Garrett Schrader comes out. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but, throws about like 15 passes, and it actually looked like a functioning regular type of offense. What can we expect on that side of things? I know there hasn't been too much media availability just yet, but are we expecting to see something similar to what we saw against Wake in the last game of the regular season?
I really don't know. If Schrader was already feeling healthy, then you would think another month off and some extra time in the like ice room and the PT room and working with trainers and stuff like that, you would think that would help. And I don't see Schrader being a guy to sit out the bowl game unless he was absolutely told he shouldn't play. I don't have anything more concrete than that. The next time we talk to anyone who would know is Sunday night. And then I think it's my understanding we'll get to watch practices pretty much every day down in Boca. So that'll be interesting. I would expect, just by nature of what bowl games are, that it is still LaQuint and Villari heavy, just to kind of showcase that these are the guys you're going to be watching next year as well. But if Garrett's playing, which again, like I haven't received any indication he isn't, but if Garrett's playing, I think you will see him kind of get to do his thing a little bit too, as like a send off, because he's a guy that like isn't going to make the NFL, or if he does, it's going to be kind of a backroads path to the NFL and some practice squad stuff. He's not getting drafted or anything like that. So this is kind of his last big moment.
Yeah, and he deserves that based on what he's done over the past couple of years. Going back to the bowl game itself, I remember when it was announced, there's this shock, like, what? They're playing in the roofclaim.com Boca Raton Bowl. They're the first power conference team to ever play in the game. I remember, listening to your and Brent's reaction to them playing, and it's like warm weather before Christmas. I mean, could you ask for anything better? So based on your understanding, how did they end up getting to play in this bowl game rather than what is an ACC bowl game?
So essentially, SU was the bottom of the pack. That's what happened, is that they all the ACC affiliate bowls, there's 12 of them, I believe, pick in a certain order. And so there's the top tier that gets the schools like Florida State and Louisville, and UNC, I guess, would be up there. And then there's the middle pack, and then there's the bottom pack. And then if there's extras, then they get sent to a bowl game like the roofclaim.com Boca Raton Bowl. And so when Florida State was left out of the playoff, that bumped everyone down in terms of what bowls they were going to go to. And from my understanding, caused a lot of chaos in the ACC trying to figure out who was going where. Like, they got the top sorted because some of that is just like mandated. Like, Florida State had to go to the Orange Bowl because that's how that works out. The ACC champion always goes if they're not in the playoff. But then the middle tier got a little jumbly, and I don't know all the specifics, but I do know that Notre Dame ended up as one of the middle tier schools, which none of the middle tier bowls were expecting. And so then when Notre Dame got in the mix for the middle tier bowls, all of them were like, well, we want Notre Dame. And obviously only one of them could have Notre Dame. So then it kind of just ripple affected. But I think just based on, at that point, Syracuse was the only ACC school going through a coaching change, which obviously puts you in a weird spot for a bowl. So I think they were just like the clear kind of bottom school that was going to get pushed to this bowl, which fun for us. And it's still a bowl game. So like, can't complain about it. But yeah, that's how they slid into that from my understanding.
I'm very excited. I happen to live like 15 minutes from FAU Stadium, so it was a nice
really?
get to go home and still cover the game. So I was very excited when it was announced the Boca Raton Bowl. It will be a late live post game show on Syracuse Sports though, since it's an 8 p.m. kick.
Yeah, I asked our editor Nate the other day. I was like, so are we doing a post game show that night? Because there's also a basketball game, albeit earlier in the day. I was like, are we gonna do 2 pods? And he was like, I was like, maybe he'll say no. Like, as much as I love doing the post-game pods, that they do get very late sometimes. And he was like, no, I think we're going to do one. I'm going to push Brent towards doing a bowl wrap-up pod. And I was like, okay, thank you. I also have a 6 a.m. flight out on Friday. So I'm like, I guess won't sleep. But then I'm off from that Friday through New Year's. So
there you go.
Just then.
Just got to get through the late bowl game pod at 1 a.m. in the morning and then hop that 6 a.m. flight, and then you're free and clear.
Exactly.
Looking at the game specifically, obviously the opponent, South Florida, an interesting season for the Bulls. They play Alabama close, 17-3. They also lose to UTSA, who's a decent team, FAU, and they pull out the win in the final week of the regular season against Charlotte to clinch bowl eligibility. I think the current line is like Syracuse by 3. How competitive is this game going to be between Syracuse, a Power 5 school, and USF, a Group of 5 in the AAC?
Honestly, I did not watch a second of USF football this season outside of a little bit of that game against Alabama, because as soon as I saw the score, I was like, what is going on in this game between Alabama and USF? I believe this is their first year under a new coach. So I think that probably contributed to a little bit of the weirdness of their season and some of the ups and downs there. Look, it's always hard to tell with bowl matchups because you're losing personnel, you're transitioning coaches. You've got, like, for a team like USF, this is another opportunity to punch up at a Power 5 opponent that they don't normally get. And for Syracuse, like, you don't know how many of these guys are like, I just want to get through this bowl game and get to Christmas and go home and be done with this. So I don't know. I'm planning to dig more a little bit into USF this week and just kind of see what their offensive attack is and all of that stuff. So look for that on Syracuse.com. But I would expect it to be competitive, just by nature of how the end of the season went for Syracuse and kind of all the turbulence they're going through right now. But who knows? Maybe they've really banded together and are like, we're gonna kick USF's butt in this bowl game. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an old Big East game from
Oh,
USF's
that's
very
true.
very short time in the Big East in the 2000s and 2010s. Last one for you. What kind of momentum do you think like a game like this does, either positively or negatively, for a program, and specifically with Syracuse? Like, I was out of the country for the Pinstripe Bowl last year, so I don't have the fondest memories of it. I've seen highlights, I've heard stories of what happened in the game, but I couldn't give you a paragraph about the game because I wasn't able to watch it. But like, what does winning or losing a bowl game do for you as you move into the off season and then into the next season, even though it's so far away?
I think if you are not changing head coaches, a bowl game can be like a great indicator of upcoming talent and who are going to be like key players next year and stuff like that. And just like it's just another opportunity to work out any kinks from the end of this season. When you're switching coaches, I think it loses a lot of that value because, again, like a guy could have a great performance next Thursday night for Syracuse, but still be like, yeah, I'm going in the transfer portal on Friday morning. And so it's just a little hard to tell. Obviously last year, like LaQuinn Allen was the breakout performance in the bowl game, and that panned out because he was the breakout performance of this year as well, if not the offensive MVP to some degree. So you know what, like, I don't know, like, I think for Syracuse this year, like, it's not going to tell us much. It's just going to kind of put a cap on the 2023 season and bottle it up and lock it away. And then everything will start fresh kind of after that January 2nd date.
Thursday night, Syracuse in South Florida. Emily, can't thank you enough for your time. Where can people find your coverage of this game and read all of your work?
You can find all my work on Syracuse.com or in the Post Standard if you get a print newspaper nowadays. And then on X, which I still call Twitter, at Emily Leiker, which is Leiker.
So how long do you get to go to Florida for? Are you turning it into a vacation?
Yes, I was shocked. I thought for sure I was going to get sent down on like Tuesday or Wednesday and only get like 24 hours. And then I got the okay to fly down on Sunday. So I leave Sunday morning and I get to stay through Friday morning. So I am very excited.
All right, gonna come back tan and make all your colleagues jealous.
Exactly. Just like Donna did a couple weeks ago after going to Hawaii. So
exactly. Well, thank you again. Looking forward to reading and listening after and before the game, and enjoy the trip down to both of you, Jordan and Emily. Enjoy the trip down to sunny Florida.